Well, it's June, so I guess it must be time to talk about the lab leak hypothesis. If you haven't seen my two previous videos on the topic, the first one was in June of 2021, and the second one was in June of 2023. Allow me to summarize. At the beginning of the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, researchers traced the virus back to its origin somewhere near Wuhan, China. And scientists wondered if the virus might have evolved naturally in the environment, thanks to a bustling wet market where such viruses do often spring up, or whether it had perhaps escaped through incompetence or evil doing from the laboratory nearby where scientists were studying coronaviruses. So the researchers looked into it, and further investigation pinpointed the wet market as the precise location where the virus jumped to humans probably several times, that the genome of the virus is consistent with a natural evolution, and that a virus that escaped from a lab would not behave the way that SARS-CoV-2 behaved. The first of this data was published in the journal Nature all the way back in March of 2020, and in the years since then, a multitude of researchers have contributed additional data supporting and refining this hypothesis. Despite that growing amount of data, certain people have continued to hold on to the idea that the virus must have escaped from a lab. The evidence they initially offered in support of the lab leak hypothesis is that there is a lab near where the virus first originated. In the 4 years since, they have added exactly 0 new data points to support that hypothesis any further. But hey, who needs data when you have a compelling conspiracy theory? As with all conspiracy theories, this one scratches an itch in the average human brain. No one wants to think that 7 million people died because of poor sanitation, a random genetic mutation, lack of preparedness, and inadequate global healthcare. Wouldn't it be so much nicer if we could just blame a specific person for fucking up? Or blame a specific shady government for covering things up? Or another shady government for developing a bioweapon? Something we can fix with a prison sentence, a guillotine, or just a quick little land war in Asia. So yeah, it's an understandable thing to want to believe. But what's frustrating is that the mainstream media should be helping the average person understand this stuff, understand why the lab leak hypothesis is probably not true. But instead, they're helping the lab leak whack jobs continue to spread their bullshit. Last time I talked about this, it was because of the Washington Post. This time, it's the New York Times. Why the Pandemic Probably Started in a Lab in 5 Key Points by noted loony Alina Chan. Spoiler alert, none of those 5 key points is actual evidence for the lab leak. Point 1 is the one data point. There's a lab near where the virus emerged. Angela Rasmussen has, as usual, a great thread explaining the other points and why they make no sense. I welcome you to check that out. I link to everything I talk about in every video. It is in the transcript, linked in the doobly-doo. But the quick overview of her thread is that all 5 points are a mix of long debunked ideas and outright lies. Alongside this ridiculous opinion piece, lab leak proponents have also managed to convince Republican congressional representatives to waste their time using this conspiracy theory as an excuse to yell at scientists.
Mr. Fauci, you were quoted on CBS Face the Nation saying it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci?
I am a scientist who uses the scientific method to gain information.
Yes, you said you represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci? Yes
Again,
or no? Yes or no?
No, that's not a yes or no answer.
Yes, it's a yes or no.
I don't think it is.
Okay, well, we'll take that as a you don't know what you represent.
But
this, as director of the NIH, you did sign off on these so-called scientific experiments. And as a dog lover, I want to tell you this is disgusting and evil, what you signed off on, and these experiments that happened to beagles paid for by the American taxpayer. And I want you to know Americans don't pay their taxes for animals to be tortured like this. So the type of science that you are representing, Mr. Fauci, is abhorrent. And it needs to stop.
That's right. That's the Queen QAnon doofus herself, Marjorie Taylor Greene, given ample time on the clock, like she's getting paid for this, to scream at an accomplished scientist who has saved thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of American lives during the pandemic, for which he's already been rewarded with at least 2 credible attempts on his life that resulted in the arrest of 2 people. And that's where I come to the actual topic of this video. There's nothing left to talk about concerning the legitimacy of the lab leak hypothesis, because proponents have had several years to offer any evidence for it, and they've managed to find none. There would be nothing wrong with that, and nothing wrong with a handful of people continuing over the years to desperately try to find anything that fits their narrative. But as with most conspiracy theories, this one has a very real, very negative impact on our society. The abuse of scientists right there on the public stage by our congressional representatives, that's one example. Congressional representatives are only encouraging the batshit science deniers to continue to threaten and harass scientists who are doing work that they don't like, which is bad enough, but it's bad for those scientists, but it also contributes to the overall public distrust of scientists. And when the general public distrusts scientists, that's going to make everything worse. You would hope that as COVID restrictions, what few there ever were, go away, harassment of scientists would ease up. But researchers say it's actually getting worse. All the data that we do have points to it increasing rather than decreasing. It's certainly getting quite prolific, says Lyndall Byford, Director of News and Partnerships at the Australian Science Media Centre in Adelaide. I'm hearing a lot from universities and research organizations that they're seeing it as an increasing problem. That article I just quoted from Nature also mentions my friend Dr. Susie Wiles, who was essentially the Dr. Fauci of New Zealand. You may think that because New Zealand had relatively great success controlling the pandemic, she would be a national hero. But just like here in the United States, anti-science lunatics have been trying to make her life a living hell. The harassment got so bad and her university did so little to help her that she actually had to sue them, the University of Auckland. That case is still ongoing, but once it finishes, I'm going to give you a complete overview because it is bonkers. That distrust of science and of scientists is one of the reasons why the US failed to protect its citizens from COVID. People were taking dewormer paste instead of getting a free, safe, effective vaccine. They refused to wear free, simple, effective masks or to avoid dining indoors with strangers. Continuing to erode the public's trust in scientists and the work they do makes everything worse. It delays our efforts to slow climate change. It fuels the bigots who want you to think there are only 2 immutable genders. And it will make the next pandemic that much harder to handle. And as we make scientists a high-risk, distrusted profession, we discourage people from becoming scientists. Who wants to spend 20 years in school only to be paid poorly and get death threats and get called up by Congress to get yelled at by a bleach blonde, bad-built, butch body bitch with beans for brains? Fewer scientists means less research, and all those issues I mentioned and more get worse. Finally, this lab leak hearing is taking up precious time, money, and energy that could be better spent on an investigation that would actually help us prepare for the next pandemic. Because believe me, there is going to be another pandemic, and we can save millions of lives by acting now. An actual helpful investigation would ask things like, why was Trump allowed to simply delete the National Security Council's Pandemic Preparedness Unit in 2018? Or had they remained in place, would they have been helpful in slowing or stopping the spread of COVID-19? Or which politicians were responsible for spreading misinformation that led to extra deaths? Or how many American lives would have been saved with universal health care? Or how many lives would have been saved with universal basic income that allowed people to stay in their homes? And crucially, how can we do better next time? Because we can do better, much better. Do you know how scientists were able to develop a COVID vaccine in less than a year? Not just hard work, but also preparedness. The Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, is an office of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It was established in 2006 to use advanced research in biomedicine to fill in gaps in the private industry in order to prepare for future pandemics and bioweapons. And that directly led to the development of the mRNA vaccines against COVID-19 during Operation Warp Speed. Operation Warp Speed cost the country about $18 billion. For just $24 billion, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy estimates it could have prototype vaccines ready for each of the 26 known viral families that cause human disease. Showing that these vaccines are safe and promote an immune response before we need them will allow for vaccines to be ready for deployment within 100 days after virus identification. That's according to the Institute for Progress, which also points out that currently BARDA only receives $2.6 billion in funding, or about the equivalent that the government spends on one nuclear submarine. Another way to think about these large sums of money is that the $24 billion we would need to have vaccines ready for every known viral disease in humans is only twice the amount that we've given to Israel in the last 8 months. Sure, we get a lot of that Israel aid back because Israel uses it to buy our bombs to take out all those hospitals and universities in Palestine. But we also get back the money we spend on pandemic preparedness by not having a bunch of people die and not needing to shut our economy down for a year or two. Personally, I think that's a better deal. That's a better way to spend our money. And so that's another question Congress could ask in a COVID-19 investigation. Why don't we just do that? Why don't we just spend that money and protect our future? The answer is unfortunately clear. It's the same reason why the lab leak hypothesis still has legs, because we don't want to deal with a big, sometimes complicated systemic problem that won't affect us until some unknown date and time in the future. We'd rather just yell at a scientist and feel like, there, we've fixed things once and for all. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.